Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So it's been made official. We'll talk about it here first. It's Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar, volume number... What number is this at this point? It's one of many. The match is happening, and it's officially happening at Crown Jewel. It was announced last night in a bit of a random announcement. Everyone knew this was happening, but I guess this is kind of the problem whilst you're running two angles at the same time, because they're actively promoting Roman Reigns versus Finn Balor at Extreme Rules, or the Demon King version of Finn Balor at Extreme Rules. But at the same time, since SummerSlam, since Brock Lesnar returned to WWE at SummerSlam, they're running an angle which is Reigns versus Lesnar. So they're kind of trying to tell two stories at the same time. But it's now official. Brock Lesnar versus Universal Champion Roman Reigns has been announced for the 2021 Crown Jewel event from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, WWE announced Lesnar versus Reigns for their return to Crown Jewel on Thursday, October 21st. Paul Heyman, as you can see right there, is advertised to appear in the corner of Roman Reigns. I guess that could change between now and then, and that's the story they're going to continue to tell on Friday Night SmackDown. I'm sure we'll get some update about that tonight on the show on Fox. Now, the Universal Championship will be on the line for Lesnar versus Reigns, but only if Reigns retains, a lot of difficult words there, if Reigns retains over the Demon King Finn Balor at Extreme Rules on September 26. Regardless of what happens though at Extreme Rules, Lesnar versus Reigns will still happen in Saudi Arabia, which I saw some people saying, well, I appreciate them referencing that. I appreciate them referencing, it's the small details that they're saying, wow, if Finn Balor wins the match at Extreme Rules, then it's going to be a non-title match. Oh, come on. You're people trying to say that, you're justifying it. Everybody knows what's happening. And everyone knew what was happening anyway, so I don't know if we should get too angry when we say, oh, it's just burying the match at Extreme Rules, because it's not. Everyone knew this match was happening anyway, because again, like I just said, they're trying to run two angles at the same time. And you know that the end game is Brock versus Roman. It's been the end game since SummerSlam. So we knew this whole Finn Balor angle with Roman Reigns, whilst it's good right now, and whilst the Demon King coming back's great, all that kind of stuff, we knew what the end game is. This storyline right now, it's just filler. It'll be a good match, and it's been a half-decent storyline, but it's filler. Finn Balor isn't winning the Universal Championship. It's just giving Roman Reigns something to do between now and October, between SummerSlam and October, because the story is Reigns versus Brock. That's why they ended SummerSlam with Reigns and Brock, because that's the story. But in the meantime, they realized, look, Brock isn't going to be on SmackDown every week. We've got a pay-per-view in September. We'll do Reigns versus Balor. It will tide us over, and then we'll get to Reigns versus Brock. Just in reality, they've just kind of shown their hands a little bit earlier. Ideally, you would say, well, at least just have them. I mean, the match between Reigns and Balor's next week. You know, you could have just done it as right after Reigns defeats Finn Balor, because he will next Sunday. Right after he beats him, you could have just then said, right, by the way, Brock Lesnar appears on the Titantron and goes, yeah, right, it's happening, Saudi Arabia, all that kind of stuff. Just do it like that. And again, it's not a big deal, because we all knew, it's kind of, if you want to get really angry about it, we all knew that this was going to be the match, and it is what it is. I mean, the moment that Brock came back at SummerSlam was one of the first things I said, right, they're doing Reigns versus Brock, Saudi Arabia, that's happening. Why people are going, oh, why would it be Saudi Arabia? Because Brock loves that money. That's Saudi money. That's part of the reason that WWE brought him back in the first place, right? The reason that it took so long for Brock Lesnar to be signed once again to a WWE deal was because of the pandemic. Everyone knows this. Brock Lesnar has the biggest contract out of anyone on the WWE roster, maybe apart from John Cena, and I don't really know Cena's contractual status with WWE anymore. So Brock had the biggest deal on the roster, and during a pandemic, when you're not running live events and you're not selling out arenas for TVs and pay-per-views and you're not doing stadium shows, you haven't got any fans whatsoever, and suddenly the revenue might come down a little bit. It didn't, because WWE fired like 3/4 of their roster. But when the revenue they thought was going to come down, Brock Lesnar's contract isn't financially viable, especially when they're not running shows like this in Saudi Arabia that pay so much money to WWE. They are the most lucrative events that they do. They're even more lucrative than WrestleManias or SummerSlams in stadiums. These events make them so much money. That's why they always have Brock Lesnar on them, because booking Brock Lesnar for a show in Saudi Arabia is financially viable because they've got so much money to play around with. So of course the match was going to happen at Crown Jewel. Ideally, would this match happen at Crown Jewel? Of course not. This feels big, and I mentioned it last night on social media when it was announced. It's amazing to me. It's amazing that this match, which we have seen so many times, when they did the match at WrestleMania 34, everyone was like, oh, yawn. We saw that match at WrestleMania 31, and the match was great. The match was great at WrestleMania 31. The one at WrestleMania 34, New Orleans couldn't give a damn about because they thought Lesnar was leaving, and then he won, and then everyone lost, basically, in the end, and Brock Lesnar went backstage and threw the Universal title at Vince McMahon and walked off. And then we had to continue the Reigns and Lesnar feud, and we got a match at Crown Jewel. We got a Crown Jewel match between Lesnar and Reigns when Reigns speared Lesnar through the cage and Lesnar won, and then eventually they had the match once again at SummerSlam later that year. All that kind of stuff. We've seen it so many times, and I don't think there is a desire to see Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar again, previously how it was presented. But now it feels strangely totally fresh. And I am very excited about the match because I know that both men will deliver. They can work, obviously. It'll be interesting to see how Brock lines up. I mean, but you can tell it's not as if he's not in good shape. I think he's in great shape, actually. But just because of the way the dynamic has just shifted, Reigns is the heel, Brock's the babyface, and just how they're going to work the match, not just the heel and babyface dynamic, how are they going to work this match? We know how Brock Lesnar matches work at this point. He does about 1 million suplexes, because he's the heel. The babyface then manages to fight back, has a bit of a comeback. Brock cuts a couple of near falls. Brock cuts him off. F5, 1, 2, 3. We get out of there. But now that's all completely changed because Reigns has that kind of format in his matches. We saw it against John Cena at SummerSlam. We've seen it in all of Roman Reigns' big title matches, his epics that he does at pay-per-views. He beats the hell out of them. He just beats them, really slow pace. The babyface fights back, couple of close near falls. Reigns hits a spear. We get out of there, or does the old guillotine choke, and that's it. We get out of there. And it's going to be interesting because is it going to be typical paint-by-numbers Brock? Is he just going to be doing suplex on Reigns and then Reigns fights back, which we've seen before? But from the babyface and heel dynamic, that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to do that anymore. So, look, whilst I wish the match didn't obviously happen at Crown Jewel, I understand why it's happening because it's that much money at stake here that WWE's gone, look, if we're going to book Brock, we need to make it on a show that's going to make a lot of money, and these Crown Jewel shows make loads of money. As far as the political stuff goes, I mean, I didn't even want to get into that, but the fact that every single time they're now having events in Saudi Arabia, people go, just cut it off, don't do it anymore, I think speaks volumes, but that is what that is. Does it take away from the match next weekend? Yeah, it does, because we know the outcome. We know the outcome, but we knew the outcome anyway. If you really thought that Finn Balor realistically was going to win the Universal Championship, you're laughing. I mean, you're laughing. The reason they brought back the Demon King is to try and add some stakes of maybe, but in reality, once again, it's another guy for Roman to beat, and it's another notch. He's beaten Cena. He's beaten Edge. He's beaten Daniel Bryan. He's going to beat the Demon. Who can stop? Who can stop Roman Reigns? Not Brock. Brock isn't going to win the Universal Championship, I don't think. So whoever that person is to stop Roman Reigns, whether it is The Rock, not at next year's WrestleMania, but even the WrestleMania after. I mean, realistically, you could put out a point that Reigns could hold the title for the next 18 months. Seriously, he could. Who's going to take the title off him? There aren't many. There aren't many options. So I think it's interesting they made the announcement last night, but the match, like I said, it is interesting. It is interesting. I'm fascinated to see just the dynamic of how they do the match. I think that's fascinating. MVP is out with an injury. I mean, we don't know if it's a storyline or not, but MVP, it's been announced that he is injured. WWE has announced that MVP suffered storyline injuries, some people are saying, at the hands of Randy Orton this past Monday night on Raw. WWE tweeted last night, breaking, due to an RKO from Randy Orton this past Monday night on Raw, MVP suffered a broken rib and is out indefinitely. Now, MVP teased the return of the Hurt Business after he took to Instagram to post a picture of him sitting alongside Shelton Benjamin. The Hurt Business was split up in late March after Lashley dismissed Benjamin and Cedric Alexander from the group in an in-ring segment. So I don't really know where this is going, to be honest with you. I don't know. Unless, I'm trying to think of it from an Extreme Rules point of view. Maybe it's a case of previously, because again, previously at Extreme Rules, it was going to be Randy Orton versus Lashley. And maybe they don't do that now, but maybe he does reunite the Hurt Business, Benjamin and Alexander, and the Hurt Business feuds with Randy Orton and Riddle for the Raw Tag Team Championships. That match happens at Extreme Rules, and then you can have Lashley versus Big E in a rematch at Extreme Rules. I don't know. I don't know where that's going, but it does feel a bit strange. Raw's just in a state of flux right now, and I don't think that's going to change until the draft, but certainly an interesting one. Speaking of interesting stories, this is an interesting one because reportedly TV networks, the two TV networks, USA Network and Fox, are reportedly pressuring WWE to book Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown evenly. Now, the TV networks which host WWE shows haven't always been thrilled with WWE's ratings, especially over the last few years. And it appears as though the networks are quite sensitive about what is aired on weekly television. Now, according to Andrew Zarian of the Matman podcast, he has been told by his sources that Fox, which broadcasts SmackDown, of course, and the USA Network, which broadcasts Monday Night Raw, are adamant that the two shows are booked evenly to avoid suggestions of favoritism. This is what Zarian had to say, quote, "From speaking a lot of my friends at the networks, they're alluding that when you see something big happen on one, expect something big to happen on the other. Maybe not the following week, but you have to treat them weekly. That's true and fairly." Now, it was noted that on the same podcast that neither network wants to be seen as the network which puts out the B show, given the vast amount of money they paid for the current WWE contracts. Now, I find that last line quite funny because, let's be honest, Raw is the B show. There is no doubt about that. Why? Because you had all of these big returns recently. Where did they go? John Cena, he comes back. He goes on SmackDown. Yes, he appeared on Raw, but he was on SmackDown. Becky Lynch comes back. She was on Raw. She's on SmackDown. Brock Lesnar comes back. He was on Raw. Where does he come back? He's on SmackDown. SmackDown is the A show. It just is. They pay more money for it. For that show, I think where NBC Universal gets frustrated is they'll say, well, yes, we might pay a little bit less, not a lot, but a little bit less for Monday Night Raw. We also pay a lot of money, $1 billion for Peacock, okay, for you to have your WWE Network on Peacock as well. So overall, we're paying more money than Fox is for SmackDown, and yet Fox gets the better product, and Fox gets the better ratings, but Fox is network television as well. I think the biggest example of this issue that WWE has right now is when they had those Hell in a Cell matches back earlier this year. They gave away that Hell in a Cell match on SmackDown, Rey Mysterio versus Roman Reigns, and then wouldn't you know it, Monday night on Raw, we suddenly have a Hell in a Cell match, Bobby Lashley versus Xavier Woods. Why? Because USA Network, NBC Universal, were pretty pissed off about it. They were like, wait a minute, why is there a Hell in a Cell match on SmackDown? Why don't we get one? And traditionally, for years and years and years, Raw has been the A show, and USA Network is used to having the A show on their network. And that hasn't been the case since 2019. And I think over time, especially now, they're getting a little bit weary. I think they're starting to think, wait a minute. You know, these ratings aren't great, and obviously the Dynamite ratings came out last night, and whilst obviously they didn't do the same amount of viewers as Monday Night Raw, which I know a lot of people point out, for the second week in a row, they beat Raw in the demo. And people are going to go, oh, the demo this, the demo that. But advertising executives and people that work at the network, they pay attention to that. Because when the cable top 150 comes up, they go, wait a minute, that show's at the top. And then Raw goes, wait a minute, we're not doing that. Now, again, you get some people are going, oh, apples to oranges, they have strong competition, they have this, they have that. They have Monday Night Football. They've had Monday Night Football for years. For years and years and years, they've had Monday Night Football. It's not as if Monday Night Football's just happened this year for the first time. They have it every year, and they have to find ways to overcome it. But over time, that rating continues to go down, and the viewership continues to go down. And the USA Network know this, but they realize that despite this, because the USA Network isn't as strong as it once was either, remember that too, they realize that, WWE Network still draws relatively well, so that's why they have the third hour. So I think this is going to be something that continues to bubble along, and with the rise of Dynamite as well, maybe not in viewership, but certainly in the demo, it's going to be a fascinating thing that plays out. Because we've heard this story a couple of times before already. Braun Breakker. A lot of people are talking about Braun Breakker, of course, after NXT this week, and he is set to be a significant part of NXT, receiving a significant push on the developmental brand going forward. As I mentioned, the 2.0 reboot episode on Tuesday opened with the son of Rick Steiner. We'll touch on that in a second, defeating LA Knight in his debut match in the opening match of the show. He then faced off with new NXT champion Tommaso Ciampa in a show-closing segment backstage. While many fans aren't thrilled with the name change, Absolutely. Most of the feedback on social media has been positive, considering that he's got a great look, he's got great charisma, and he feels like a future main event guy. Now, in an update, word going around is that fans can expect quite the push for Breakker in the weeks ahead, according to a report by PW Insider. This was clear with how WWE booked his debut this past Tuesday night. Now, regarding the name change from Rex Steiner, which was previously the rumored name for him, to Braun Breakker, a source pointed to how WWE wants to create and own the trademarks of all their superstar ring names, and that's likely the reason for the switch. That is nothing new. They've always done that. Again, I think the people's issue isn't necessarily the name change. Rex Steiner is a great name, but the reason why people are frustrated is because the new name sucks. Braun Breakker is terrible. Absolutely terrible. And it's one of those names that if he does become a main event guy and he does become a world champion, if he's going on talk shows, it's one of those names like, you can imagine him on the Today Show and they go, Braun Breakker. It's one of those cringe names because you know people at home are like, oh, what kind of name is that? Or the hosts would be like, Braun Breakker, oh, what a name. You're like, oh, it's so corny. And it's very WWE. Now, of course, Breakker is the son of Rick Steiner and the nephew of Scott Steiner. You'd be able to tell that just by looking at him, especially when he talks as well. He's very Steiner. But that was not acknowledged as he made his debut this past week because neither Rick or Scott was ever named. Now, on the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer radio show, Dave Meltzer noted that the announcers were not allowed to say Rick Steiner's name. Vic Joseph, however, did get the line dog-faced gremlin as a reference to Rick Steiner. It was noticeable that Brooke Jensen, son of Bull Buchanan, was referred to as a second-generation star, although Bull Buchanan was not referenced by name either. I wasn't surprised. I know that people said, oh, I can't believe WWE would do that. Maybe the Rick Steiner stuff, I thought they might say Rick Steiner, but you have to remember the kind of relationship that's going on with Steiners and WWE right now. Scott Steiner is on like their don't even talk about list, don't even reference his list, all that kind of stuff because of the crazy stuff between him and Hulk Hogan and some of the stuff he said about WWE. But then on the flip side, you are hiring his nephew. So it's kind of difficult not to. And I guess it's a case of sometimes WWE thinks pro wrestling fans don't notice or don't care, but they do. But their point of view is, in reality, the casual fan doesn't really care or know who Rick or Scott Steiner is, which again is BS, but WWE's weird. WWE's weird with stuff like that, and they always have been. That's nothing new. Speaking of NXT on Tuesday night as well, viewership and key demo numbers, of course, were up this past week, and there was some change behind the scenes as well. According to Dave Meltzer on the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer radio show, he noted that Shawn Michaels was in charge of NXT, whilst, of course, Triple H is recovering from heart surgery. It was reported before the show that executive producer and chief of global television distribution Kevin Dunn was at the taping as well. But Meltzer did note that Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard were not at the taping, which was earlier reported by Ringside News, which, again, okay, they've got a couple of things right. Prichard has visited NXT recently, though, but McMahon has reportedly not been in NXT since his visit down the Performance Center this past summer. McMahon did review, though, the script for NXT 2.0 this week and was involved in creative. McMahon is not the key man in charge of NXT, though. It was previously reported that McMahon and Prichard will not be directly involved in producing NXT. So what we're kind of seeing is what was reported previously. There was those... Brian Alvarez that reported said McMahon and Prichard, they're going to be involved producing and directing NXT, and that's not the case. But I think what we're seeing now is Vince McMahon getting the script, looking at it going, that's fine, boom, done. Or Braun Breakker, this guy, he's got to be pushed, this is the character we want, these are the gimmicks we want. And again, well, people might not like that because it's not the NXT that they love, but personally, I've kind of come to the point of, if this means that I can get invested in a character in NXT and he's not going to be, or she's not going to be changed on the main roster and then changed into something else, then I'm happy with that. You know, I'd rather not get attached to something that's going to change and I'll be disappointed about. And that's kind of the feeling I have by that point now. Speaking of which, Adam Cole, there was this rumor, wasn't there, a report that was going around talking about that he was going to, one of the ideas pitched for him on main roster was that he was going to be the manager for Keith Lee. And Adam Cole's kind of dismissed that in an interview with TV Insider. He said this, I have personally never heard anything regarding that. I touched base a little bit on how my meeting with Vince McMahon went really well. We talked for about 30 minutes. He had a lot of complimentary things to say. As far as hearing that specific thing, that was not something I heard about. My 4 years with NXT were fantastic. My 4 years with WWE were awesome. But at the end of the day, I wanted to end up with AEW. Now that I'm here, I'm stoked. So he's saying that he'd never heard of it, or he hasn't heard of that idea, which a lot of people are pointing out, going, see, it's not true. You bash WWE and you make up these things. It's not true. They're just rumors. They're this, they're that. Just because Adam Cole didn't hear it doesn't mean that wasn't an idea that was floated around, right? We hear those stories for years. This is the annoying thing. People try and ignore history when it comes to stuff like this. You'll ask a talent, what about this rumor for this gimmick? And he'll go, I haven't heard anything about that. And then you'll have Bruce Prichard on a podcast 10 years later going, what about this? He goes, yeah, that was one of the plans that was thrown around. Or Vince Russo's going, yep, that was one of the things that was thrown around. Absolutely. In 10 years' time, 15 years' time, if podcasts are still a thing, or video interviews, or we've got the microchip planted in our brain and we're watching the internet and doing this kind of stuff, I don't know. They'll be like, oh yeah, there was a pitch that Adam Cole could be the manager of Keith Lee, because those things come out of somewhere. Those things do come out of somewhere. Again, I'm not saying it was true or false, but just because Adam Cole hasn't heard it himself doesn't mean it's not true. That's always worth taking into account. Finally, Andrew Yang is back talking about professional wrestling once again. Now, last year, when the whole third-party platform edict came up and the conversation about independent contractors came up once again, Andrew Yang did a few pro wrestling interviews saying that when Joe Biden was elected, he was going to be part of that administration, or if he wasn't, he was going to make sure that pro wrestlers and that whole independent contractor stuff was removed. And then guess what? It didn't happen. Zelina Vega is back with WWE at this point, and like every single time this issue is brought up throughout history, people get angry, and then something else comes up, they get angry about that, and they move on. No change ever happens. But Andrew Yang tweeted out yesterday saying, quote, had a call with the Department of Labor. If you are a current or former WWE performer who feels you were misclassified as an independent contractor, contact this attorney and let's get you what Vince McMahon owes you. Been a long time coming, but this storyline is real. Now, one fan responded to him saying, quote, if I fall into this group, please note that about 2 years ago, Andrew said the same thing. He said if Biden won, he would become Labor Secretary and fix this. Then after he didn't become Labor Secretary, he decided to run for the mayor of New York City and then pulled out of that race. Yang wrote back to that, 2 years ago, the Department of Labor was managed by someone who was very close to Vince. Times changed. Now, the lawyer he referenced is Lucas Middlebrook, and if you go and look at him, there are a couple of people, pro wrestlers, ex-WWE superstars, and one current actually, following the lawyer. Again, I was excited about the possibility for reform and change last year when he was saying these things, Andrew Yang, but guess what? Nothing happened. Nothing happened. And at this point, we've heard this conversation so many times, over and over and over again, until something realistically actually happens and there is some real change or some real movement for change to happen, I won't hold my hopes up. I've been burnt too many times. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel, so be sure to get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash the like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go to the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.